What's up, Dragon Brood? This is always a fun video to do every set because this is really just like my top 10. These are going to be my favorite cards I'm looking forward to building with or playing with, or in some way just getting beat by them when the new set drops. So let's take a look at what I'm calling my top 10 from Phyrexia All Will Be One, because I'm sure some of you are going to disagree with me and others are going to be like, yeah, those are awesome. But anyway, let's get to it. Alright, for starters, we're starting at Terra Next Rex. And I know it's dumb, it's a big 7 mana 8/8, but like, let's talk about this card seriously, right? Like, it's a 7 mana 8/8. It's also a dinosaur if you need more dinosaurs for your commander deck or whatever. But the thing about this card is that, one, it can't be countered, so it's guaranteed to hit the table, right? It has trample, so 8/8, it's going to trample, good stuff. It has Ward 4, so even if you get it out, your opponent likely isn't going to be able to kill it right when you play it because they would need an extra 4 mana. Not to say they can't on the turn you would have 7 mana, they probably have like 5 or 6 themselves, but it also has haste. And this means that not only do you get to play it, not only is it not counterable, not only does it have Ward, you actually at least get to attack with it, because that's always the downfall of big creatures like this, right? They cost so much mana, you get them on the table and then they just die before they get to do anything. But as a kicker, well, not kicker, there's no kicker, but you know what I'm saying. Toxic 4. So if you connect with that trample damage, they take 4 toxic damage. Now, this could be the big finisher for toxic/poison decks. This could just be a big attacker for something that's generating a ton of mana. Who knows? I'm not totally sure which deck wants this the most, but this is cool even if it's just as a one-of, as a top end for a few different decks. Alright, the next crazy card I have on my list is Mondrak Glory Dominus. It's a 2-colorless white-white 4/4 Phyrexian horror. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many tokens are created instead. You can pay 1 and 2 white Phyrexian mana. I don't know how we're supposed to talk about those yet. Sacrifice 2 other artifacts and or creatures. Put an indestructible counter on Mondrak. Now, the reason this is cool is we already have other effects that create extra tokens, right? Whether we're talking about stuff like Jennifer, or maybe it's Queen Alanal, or maybe we're talking about like Rabble Rousing. All of those things could potentially be in the same deck as this card. Then you're talking about making a token which triggers another thing that gets double the tokens. So now you got triple the tokens. Like it's just a mess, right? There's so many things that could happen here. And even if you don't have other token generators, this thing's still a 4/4 body by itself, like a realistic threat all on its own. So I like what this card's doing. And if it triggers even one time, now you have enough stuff to sacrifice to it to give it indestructible. And you can use indestructible at any time, so that's super awesome. Now, the artwork's kind of creepy. This thing has like, I don't know, like 5 mouth/faces and a body at the top. Like, I don't know how the anatomy works on Phyrexian stuff. But if you can handle looking at the creepy artwork, this card's actually pretty damn cool. I will definitely be playing this and have a few lists this probably already goes into. Now, y'all know I had to talk about this card. Like, I was excited about this on the preview, so you knew this was going to make my list. But Thronebreaker of Silence, 3 colorless, green, 5/5, Troll Shaman. This is another creature that can't be countered. It has trample. It can't be the target of non-green spells your opponent controls. And as long as it's your turn, it has indestructible. Like, okay, this card, first off, pretty much says, F those mono blue decks, right? I mean, unless they're going to play a 5/5 duder to block it, cool. But realistically, even then, if you put even one counter on this, you win the combats, right? This is actually really cool. Now, that being said, it's not protection from blue, so they could technically block with like a big Haughty-Djinn, but you at least make them commit the Haughty-Djinn early and give it up. And I'm okay with that. But this is actually a good just late game card to have even sideboard if you're playing best of 3 against some of those control matchups with blue. But even beyond that, they just can't target it with things, right? So you don't ever have to worry about a Wandering Emperor eating this, because it's a non-green source, so it wouldn't be able to target it. This card is really dang cool. It's super powerful, super defensive. It is 5 mana, so, you know, it's not like the easiest thing to play, but you can get to 5 quite frequently. We see it in pretty much all the games these days, and it's just a huge body. So yeah, I'm definitely big fan of this card for sure. Next up, I've got Skrelv Defector Might. It's a 1 mana, 1/1, 1 white mana, 1/1, toxic 1. It can't block, However, you can pay 1 white Phyrexia mana and tap it, choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from the color of your choice until end of turn, and it can't be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. What I like about this card is it feels like it fits into a few different decks, right? Like you can play it in some builds just to have something to give your stuff protection, kind of like Mother of Runes did back in the day. You can also make something, as if we are going to be leaning on some monocolor decks, right? Your opponent now can't block, and that's a guaranteed extra poison counter. So that's actually pretty cool. This card itself also is toxic and has poison. So if you play it turn 1, your opponent doesn't play anything on 1, you at least get to get in there, and now you have a cool defensive ability. Now, not being able to block is a little bit of a liability, but you're mostly playing it for the ability to protect your other things and sneak them through. So I'm a pretty big fan of this card. Now, where it fits, I don't quite know yet. I think it's going to depend on how we end up building the different toxic decks. But this is actually cool. It's a very neat design, and it does a lot of stuff for 1 mana. Skrelv's Hive. Because, you know, if I like Skrelv, why not this card? Colorless and a white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a 1/1 colorless Phyrexian Might artifact creature token with Toxic 1, and this creature can't block. As long as your opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control with Toxic have lifelink. Now, here's another fun thing about this card, right? We talked about mondrak a couple of cards ago, right? So every time you get a token, you would get double the number of tokens. And you wouldn't be paying any extra life. You pay 1, you create 1, but instead of 1, you make 2. Well, at some point, you start connecting with these, and now it's like, okay, well, now they all have lifelink, so I don't even care that I'm losing life anymore. This could actually pile on very quickly with another few options where you're talking about playing wedding announcements, you know, some of the other cards we mentioned earlier when talking about mondrak. Like, you can get all types of tokens very fast with this also contributing. This could end up being quite the mess for your opponents to deal with. Like, this is pretty exciting. And think about this. If you ended up with a bunch of tokens and you happen to have something like a cat per se that gives all your stuff +2 or even +3, and one of those abilities happens to be trample, that toxic is going to end up being lethal damage. Like, that's actually pretty crazy. Jetmir does a lot for this type of deck. So there's a lot of cool stuff you're going to be able to do with tokens, and this card might end up being part of those actual builds. Now, which builds are going to be superior? I think that's going to be the real trick, but this might even go into other builds too, where you just need stuff to sacrifice, right, in older formats. So this is actually pretty cool. It'd be interesting to see where this ends up, because these particular tokens can't block, and that is a drawback, but the upside is pretty good on this. All right, next up we got Luca, Bound to Ruin. This is an interesting one because I think some people hate it because they dislike Luca. That is what it is. But you can actually play this fairly easily for the full 5 mana. I don't think you have to play this on the cheap. Now, I don't think there's anything terrible playing it on the cheap, because you can play it for 4, give up a couple of life, you only end up with 3 loyalty, but you can still -1 and make a 3/3, and then just make a 3/3 for the next couple of turns if you wanted to, and that's actually totally reasonable. But you can also go from 4 to 6 mana with just this card, right? You can get it into play for 4, then you make your 3/3 so you have something to block with, and then next turn you have the 4 you spent originally for this plus the 2 that this makes, and now you start playing big crazy stuff. So this card actually can allow you to do a lot of things that we're probably not even really considering. The ultimate's actually pretty interesting, but really more often than not, I think we want the first 2 abilities on this. This actually seems really, really strong, and the only real downside I see here is we're going to have a lot of options for the red-green decks at 3, 4, and 5 mana, and I don't know if Luca really is going to have a home. It's going to be tough to fill that spot right now, because we already have Reckless Stormseeker. We've got some new cards actually in this set that are going to fill in the 3 and 4s quite well. You know, you've got the Thundering Raiju, just all kinds of things that go in those spots. So I'm not 100% sure where this is going to live just yet, but it feels like almost too good not to play with. If nothing else, it's at least leaves a Planeswalker on the board when you're up against those Farewell decks, and then you're just making 3/3s every turn. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens with this one. Now, I want to admit, Tyvar Jubilant Brawler is one of the cards I don't really even have any idea of what I want to do with yet, but I just like the design of it. So it's a colorless black-green for a 3 loyalty Planeswalker, but you can play activated abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. So basically anything you have that needs to tap for something or whatever, you can do that right out of the gate. You also can pay 1 and untap a creature. So if you have something that comes into play that gets an ability, then you could pay 1, untap it, use it again. Pretty awesome. But you can also -2, mill 3 cards, then you return a creature with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It doesn't even have to be from the cards that you milled. It could just be something already existing in the graveyard. Now, it is pretty fragile because it's only 3 loyalty, technically 4 because you can activate it when it comes into play. So you're not going to be able to defend it that well unless you just happen to have another creature maybe that you attacked with and then you untapped it, right? But that's fine. I think this is the type of card that it's not really there to do huge things. It's just there to do kind of slightly combo-rific things, if you will. And I think that could be pretty neat. I'm looking forward to trying to build with this, or even seeing what other people do with it right out of the gate, because I feel it's going to be like a really fun build that this goes into. I don't even know how we're pronouncing this. Like Miglos, I guess is what we're going to go with. Maze Crusher. Colorless, red, green, 4/4. Like that already, a 3 mana 4/4 is already solid. Unless it has like a ridiculously drawback, you're like, yeah, this obviously we're going to play this card, right? Enters the battlefield with 5 oil counters on it. Now, before you even start thinking about all the stuff we can do with it, understand that 5 oil counters is actually important because there's other cards that say if you have X number of total oil counters or whatever, right? This is giving you 5 right off the bat for 3 mana. Then you can pay 1, remove it, or remove an oil counter, and this card gains Vigilance and Menace. Not or, it gets both. So it gets to attack without tapping, and your opponent has to double block it if they want to stop it. So that's already silly. Then you can remove 2, and it gets +2/+2. So if you did decide to attack with it, and your opponent wanted to double block with it, you could actually make it a 6/6 for 3 extra mana on the next turn, and really be a, well, not to be funny, but a menace to your opponent. Or you can just pay 3, remove 3 oil counters, and destroy a target artifact or enchantment. So this also allows you to have artifact and enchantment removal without playing a lot of extra stuff in your deck to deal with those other cards. So yeah, I'm excited about this card. Like, I can't see a world where Gruul or Jund decks aren't at least going to consider this card. It happens to be a beast. I don't think that's really relevant right now, at least not for a lot of current cards. But just the size of the body, even if you didn't activate one of those abilities the whole game, is still more than worth it. And then it's all upside from there. And we have Black Sun's Twilight. It's an X and black for an instant. In which, by the way, having any of these types of X spells be instant is always so nice. Like, a lot of times they're sorcery for the effect they have, but this is really cool. But up to 1 target creature gets -X till end of turn, which is great when you're trying to get rid of stuff that has indestructible or whatever. Being able to just pay 3/4 mana, get rid of a problematic card, super awesome. Right? You can also get your opponent to commit to something on the turn, or just wait and see what they do, then kill something during their end step, which is also great. However, if you happen to pay 6 total mana, 5 or more for X, you also get to return a creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. The cool part about this is it actually even allows you at instant speed to get one of your big things back. And even if your opponent doesn't have anything, as long as you have a thing to target initially for that -X, it could be some mana creature you have in play. Hell, it could be one of the mana creatures you use to pay for this ability. And then you get something big out of yard at instant speed. We don't have a ton of ways that are convenient anyway to get creatures back into play at instant speed, historically in Magic. So this is actually really cool that it's a solid removal card for a big chunk of the game, and then at the later stages, just becomes a really problematic card because it's something your opponent has to always consider could be a thing. So yeah, I like the versatility of this card. I expect to see it in a few different deck lists. And if you're playing Reanimator, it's just kind of like a gimme, because now you get 4 copies of removal if you need it, in addition to having 4 extra Reanimator spells. This is actually really, really neat. But now that y'all know my top 10 list, I'm kind of curious, what cards are y'all targeting? Like, what do you find interesting? What are you going to be trying to play with? Because I think that could be just as much of a story as what I like to play with. And I always like knowing about y'all. And if you want to know what cards I think are actually a bit underrated in this set, or maybe some cool little sleepers, check out this other video.